everyone, welcome back. It's Christina Wainwright, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 35 of our read-along together of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And as promised, we have had some exciting things happen this week, and during today's reading, a lot of little elements that have been planted in the last week or two are going to come together, and we'll see how they start meshing. So really, really exciting reading day today. I'm pleased also that it's a shorter reading day. We're reading 2 chapters and they are medium length, so we have a little bit of time to talk today beforehand without my feeling too guilty that it's going over an hour. So let's start out with our tea. I decided on the blood orange because A, I like it a lot and I have a big canister of it, but also because we've got a really exciting reading day, so I did not think I needed caffeine to get me more hyped up. Also, there's something about blood. I know it's a blood orange, but considering like the bad blood that we've had in this story and how some of the secrets are going to come out and go together, I just thought a blood orange sounded just kind of, not sinister, but a little bit dramatic, and that sounded right for today's reading. So let's enjoy our blood orange tea today, and I hope you guys are having something wonderful. If you'd like to comment as to what it is, I always enjoy seeing that. That is so good. I wonder how it'd be to bring in a slice of orange and just add that to it as well. Because, you know, standard orange has a different flavor than a blood orange, but I just think that might really heighten the citrus. I'll try to remember to do that next week. All right, so let's see how we go. We're going to start by talking a little bit about yesterday's readings. We read 3 chapters yesterday. Chapter 58 was called Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort, and it was about Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort, the grandfather of Valentine, the father of Monsieur de Villefort. And in this one, basically, while the previous chapter's action is going on, while Valentine is talking with Maximilian Morel, again on either side of the gate adjacent to the garden, at that same time, her father and her stepmother had been speaking with Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort. And Monsieur Noirtier was told by his son that Valentine is going to be marrying Franz d'Epinay. And Noirtier is very unhappy about it. Even though he's paralyzed, he's able to express with his eyes how he feels. And so he's devised a language with Valentine that his son also understands, though he sometimes chooses not to. They have devised a language. And so, and just to refresh you in case you're curious, to say yes, he would shut his eyes briefly, and to say no, he would blink his eyes rapidly a few times, and that's how he would communicate. And then also he would signal as they ran through the letters of an alphabet, either verbally or along a dictionary. That's how he would say, "That's the word I want." Sorry, I just saw Judy's comment. She's just having water today because it's too hot to boil. I hear you. Sometimes I feel that way too. We are very lucky to have air conditioning here at the library. If I was doing this from home, I think I'd be having a lot more iced tea. Let's see. Lost my train of thought. Yeah, so Monsieur Noirtier is upset to hear that Valentine, his granddaughter, is going to be marrying Franz d'Epinay, who's been betrothed to him. And the reason, which you may recall, is many, many chapters ago, back when Edmond Dantes was just, coming in to, about to go to Paris to deliver that letter to Monsieur Noirtier, and Monsieur Villefort intercepted that letter, and he actually went to the king to speak with him about this plot involving Bonaparte coming back to France. Monsieur de Villefort hears that there has been a murder of a General Quesnel, that he was murdered by some Bonapartist because General Quesnel had been pretending to be a Bonapartist when really he was a royalist, loyal to the king. And so the description that Monsieur de Villefort hears about the man who had killed General Quesnel is the description of Monsieur Noirtier, his own father. And so what we discover I can't even remember if it was this chapter or the next, what we discover is that General Quesnel was also the Baron d'Epinay. So Franz d'Epinay's father was murdered by Valentine's grandfather. And so this is part of the drama that's going on there, is that Monsieur de Villefort wants his daughter to marry the son of the man whom his father killed, kind of to like set things right, kind of. But it's not known publicly that Monsieur Noirtier is the Bonapartist who murdered General Quesnel. So Noirtier is very upset the idea that his granddaughter could be marrying the son of one of his enemies, and but Villefort wants this marriage to go through. What ends up happening in the next chapter is that I forgot one other part too. In that chapter about Monsieur Noirtier, Valentine and her grandfather talk with each other, and she lets him know that she doesn't want this marriage either, that her father and stepmother are pressuring her to do it, and she cannot resist it. And she said, if only there was some way you could help me, but you are as helpless as I in so many ways, because, you know, she's a woman, and he is a dependent of her father, and he is paralyzed. And so between those two things, neither of them can really stop this marriage from happening. Which sparks the actions of the next chapter, when Monsieur Noirtier realizes he does still have power, and his power is basically the power of the purse and obstinacy. And so what he does is he signals through Valentine that he wants a notary to come, and that he wants to make a new will. And even though he loves Valentine, and the whole family knows how much he adores Valentine, he basically communicates that he wants to disinherit Valentine, and he also wants to disinherit his son, his grandson, and everyone else in the family, because he is upset about the marriage that has been contracted for Valentine and the Baron d'Épinay. What's also interesting about this, too, is that the notary points out that, I guess it's one of the laws in France, that the Monsieur Noirtier cannot completely disinherit his son, that his son, Monsieur Villefort, can protest the will. However, Monsieur de Villefort says, my father knows me well. Even though I could protest it, I will not. Because, you know, he basically has too much pride to do it. And also he, as a government official, as basically a judge, he doesn't want to be seen as going against his father's wishes and taking money that would otherwise be donated to the poor for himself. And so because he doesn't want to look bad, and also bring to light his father's choosing to disinherit him in this fashion, he is not going to fight the will. So Noirtier is trying to influence his son to not force his granddaughter to marry Franz d'Épinay. Finally, in the last chapter that we read yesterday, The Telegraph, Monsieur and Madame de Villefort are very upset after this confrontation with Monsieur Noirtier. And they go back over to their drawing room, and they find the Count of Monte Cristo there for a call. And the Count of Monte Cristo is basically listening at first as the two of them are griping back and forth a little bit. Oh, actually, sorry. First, Villefort is griping with Monte Cristo about, you know, I've had this thing happen with my father. I don't really want to talk about it. And then he talks about it. And then his wife comes down and they talk about it some more. And that's when it's revealed that, you know, General Quesnel and Monsieur d'Épinay's father were indeed the same person, and that he was assassinated by a Bonapartist. Which is interesting, too, that Monte Cristo knows these details, and Villefort seems rather surprised by that, too. So, interesting. And Villefort is not yet getting the hint that Monte Cristo knows more about him than he should, but we know. Then Monte Cristo reminds Madame and Monsieur de Villefort that he's invited them to have dinner with them. They're like, oh yes, of course, we'd love to do it. And then he says, you know, it's not actually here in the city at my house at the Champs-Élysées, it's at my country home. And they're still both like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds great, we'll go. And they say, where is that? And Monte Cristo explains, it's in Auteuil. And suddenly, we start seeing the agitation and hesitation of Villefort. He's like, where in Auteuil? It's like, well, it's on the Rue de la Fontaine. Really? Where on the Rue de la Fontaine? Number 28. Really? And that's when the penny drops, that the Count of Monte Cristo has purchased the home that belonged to Monsieur de Saint-Méran, the former father-in-law of Monsieur de Villefort, the home that Bertuccio had told Monte Cristo about in a previous chapter, when he had described how he had had a vendetta against Monsieur de Villefort, and that indeed he believed he had murdered Monsieur de Villefort in that same garden after watching Monsieur de Villefort bury the baby that had been born to his mistress. So, this is the house to which the Count of Monte Cristo has invited Monsieur de Villefort and his new wife to dine. And Monsieur de Villefort is obviously uncomfortable about this, but trying to play it off. And again, he's already committed himself that he will be there. Finally, a lot of drama going on there. Something that seems kind of insignificant, but again is about to be very significant, is that the Count of Monte Cristo says to them, oh, I need to go now. I'm on my way to learn about the telegraph. And they're like, the telegraph? And he's like, yes, I'm interested in learning about it. And he goes on and makes a very big deal about how he doesn't want to visit some high-ranking government official to learn about, the big picture about the telegraph, nor the science of how the telegraph works. But he actually wants to see somebody who does the telegraph, who operates the telegraph, so he can learn it that way. And so he goes off on his own to meet somebody about the telegraph. I promise that is about to be a little bit come clear in this next chapter. And in fact, this is another instance where our chapters have different names between the different editions. So if you are reading along in another edition, please go ahead and comment as to what your chapter is called. I'm really curious. So in the Everyman Library edition, which I tend to refer to but not read to you from, because it is still under copyright, they're calling that chapter The Bribe. But in the chapter we're going to be reading together from the Routledge and Sons edition, which I believe was published in 1888, that translation, their chapter 61 is called How a Gardener May Get Rid of the Dormice That Eat His Peaches. A very different title. All right, so let's go ahead and read chapters 61 and 62 today. I promise these are good chapters. The second one especially, it all comes together, and it's just so exciting and beautiful to see it come together. So if you don't already have your iced tea or ice water or a hot beverage, I encourage you to get one now. You may need it. It's so good. Okay, let's start in with chapter 61, How a Gardener May Get Rid of the Dormice That Eat His Peaches. Not on the same night as he had stated, but the next morning, the Count of Monte Cristo went out by the Barrière d'Enfer, taking the road to Orléans. Leaving the village of Linas without stopping at the telegraph, which flourished its great bony arms as he passed, the Count reached the tower of Montlhéry, situated, as everyone knows, upon the highest point of the plain of that name. At the foot of the hill, the Count dismounted and began to ascend by a little winding path about 18 inches wide. When he reached the summit, he found himself stopped by a hedge, upon which green fruit had succeeded to red and white flowers. Monte Cristo looked for the entrance to the enclosure, and was not long in finding a little wooden gate, working on willow hinges and fastened with a nail and string. The Count soon mastered the mechanism, the gate opened, and he then found himself in a little garden about 20 feet long by 12 wide, bounded on one side by part of the hedge, which contained the ingenious contrivance we have called a gate, and on the other by the old tower, covered with ivy and studded with wallflowers. No one would have thought, in looking at this old, weather-beaten, floral-decked tower, which might be likened to an elderly dame dressed up to receive her grandchildren at a birthday feast, that it would have been capable of telling strange things, if, in addition to the menacing ears which the proverb says all walls are provided with, it had also a voice. The garden was crossed by a path of red gravel, edged by a border of thick box, of many years' growth, and of a tone and color that would have delighted the heart of Delacroix, our modern Rubens. This path was formed in the shape of the figure of 8, thus, in its windings, made a walk of 60 feet and a garden of only 20. Never had Flora, the fresh and smiling goddess of gardeners, been honored with a purer or more scrupulous worship than that which was paid to her in this little enclosure. In fact, of the 20 rose trees which formed the parterre, not one bore the mark of the slug, nor were there evidences anywhere of the clustering aphis, which is so destructive to plants growing in a damp soil. And yet it was not because the damp had been excluded from the garden. The earth, black as soot, the thick foliage of the trees betrayed its presence. Besides, had natural humidity been wanting, it could have been immediately supplied by artificial means, thanks to a tank of water, sunk in one of the corners of the garden, and upon which were stationed a frog and a toad, who, from antipathy no doubt, always remained on the two opposite sides of the basin. There was not a blade of grass to be seen in the paths, or a weed in the flower beds. No fine lady ever trained and watered her geraniums, her cacti, and her rhododendrons in her porcelain jardiniere with more pains than this hitherto unseen gardener bestowed upon his little enclosure. Monte Cristo stopped after having closed the gate and fastened the string to the nail, and cast a look around. "The man at the telegraph," said he, "must either engage a gardener or devote himself passionately to agriculture." Suddenly, he struck against something crouching behind a wheelbarrow filled with leaves. The something rose, uttering an exclamation of astonishment, and Monte Cristo found himself facing a man about 50 years old, who was plucking strawberries, which he was placing upon grape leaves. He had 12 leaves and about as many strawberries, which, on rising suddenly, he let fall from his hand. "You are gathering your crop, sir?" said Monte Cristo, smiling. "Excuse me, sir," replied the man, raising his hand to his cap. "I am not up there, I know, but I have only just come down." "Do not let me interfere with you in anything, my friend," said the Count. "Gather your strawberries, if indeed there are any left." "I have 10 more," said the man, "for here are 11, and I had 21, 5 more than last year. But I am not surprised. The spring has been warm this year, and strawberries require heat, sir. This is the reason that, instead of the 16 I had last year, I have this year, you see, 11 already plucked, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Ah, I missed 3. They were here last night, sir. I am sure they were here. I counted them. It must be the son of Mère Simon who has stolen them. I saw him strolling about here this morning. Ah, the young rascal, stealing in a garden. He does not know where that may lead him to." "Certainly it is wrong," said Monte Cristo, "but you should take into consideration the youth and greediness of the delinquent." "Of course," said the gardener, "but that does not make it the less unpleasant. But, sir, once more I beg pardon. Perhaps you are an officer that I am detaining here," and he glanced timidly at the Count's blue coat. "Calm yourself, my friend," said the Count, with the smile which he made at will either terrible or benevolent, and which now expressed only the kindliest feeling. "I am not an inspector, but a traveler, brought here by a curiosity he half repents of, since he causes you to lose your time." "Ah, my time is not valuable," replied the man with a melancholy smile. "Still, it belongs to government, and I ought not to waste it. But, having received the signal that I might rest for an hour," here he glanced at the sundial, for there was everything in the enclosure of Montlhéry, even a sundial, "and having 10 minutes before me, and my strawberries being ripe, when a day longer— By the day, sir, do you think dormice eat them?" "Indeed, I should think not," replied Monte Cristo. "Dormice are bad neighbors for us who do not eat them preserved, as the Romans did." "What? Did the Romans eat them?" said the gardener. "Ate dormice?" "I have read so in Petronius," said the Count. "Really? They can't be nice, though. They can't be nice, though they do say as fat as a dormouse. It is not a wonder they are fat, sleeping all day and only waking to eat all night. Listen. Last year I had 4 apricots. They stole 1. I had 1 nectarine, only 1. Well, sir, they ate half of it on the wall. A splendid nectarine. I never ate a better." "You ate it?" That is to say, the half that was left. You understand. It was exquisite, sir. Ah, those gentlemen never choose the worst morsels, like Mère Simon's son, who has not chosen the worst strawberries. But this year," continued the horticulturalist, "I'll take care it shall not happen, even if I should be forced to sit by the whole night to watch when the strawberries are ripe." Monte Cristo had seen enough. Every man has a devouring passion in his heart, as every fruit has its worm. That of the telegraph man was horticulture. He began gathering the grape leaves which screened the sun from the grapes, and won the heart of the gardener. "Did you come here, sir, to see the telegraph?" he said. "Yes, if it isn't contrary to the rules." "Oh, no," said the gardener, "not in the least, since there is no danger that anyone can possibly understand what we are saying." "I have been told," said the Count, that you do not always yourselves understand the signals you repeat." "That is true, sir, and that is what I like best," said the man, smiling. "Why do you like that best?" "Because then I have no responsibility. I am a machine then, and nothing else, and so long as I work, nothing more is required of me." "Is it possible," said Monte Cristo to himself, that I can have met with a man that has no ambition? That would spoil my plans. Sir, said the gardener, glancing at the sundial, the 10 minutes are almost up. I must return to my post. Will you go up with me? I follow you. Monte Cristo entered the tower, which was divided into 3 stories. The tower contained implements such as spades, rakes, watering pots, hung against the wall. This was all the furniture. The second was the man's conventional abode, or rather sleeping place. It contained a few poor articles of household furniture. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stone pitcher, and some dry herbs hung up to the ceiling, which the Count recognized as sweet peas, and of which the good man was preserving the seeds. He had labeled them with as much care as if he had been master botanist in the Garden des Plantes. Does it require much study to learn the art of telegraphing? Asked Monte Cristo. The study does not take long. It was acting as a supernumerary that was so tedious. And what is the pay? 1,000 francs, sir. It is nothing. No, but then we are lodged, as you perceive. Monte Cristo looked at the room. They passed to the 3rd story. It was the telegraph room. Monte Cristo looked in turn at the 2 iron handles by which the machine was worked. It is very interesting, he said, but it must be very tedious for a lifetime. Yes. At first my neck was cramped with looking at it, but at the end of a year I became used to it. And then we have our hours of recreation and our holidays. Holidays? Yes. When? When we have a fog. Haha, to be sure. Those are indeed holidays to me. I go into the garden, I plant, I prune, I trim, I kill the insects all day long. How long have you been here? 10 years, and 5 as a supernumerary make 15. You are 55 years old. How long must you have served to claim the pension? Oh, sir, 25 years. And how much is the pension? 100 crowns. Poor humanity, murmured Monte Cristo. What did you say, sir? Asked the man. I said it was very interesting. What was? All you were showing me. And you really understand none of these signals? None at all. And have you never tried to understand them? Never. Why should I? But still, there are some signals only addressed to you. Certainly. And do you understand them? They are always the same. And they mean nothing new, you have an hour, or tomorrow. And that is simple enough, said the Count. But look, is not your correspondent putting itself in motion? Ah, yes. Thank you, sir. And what is it saying? Anything you understand? Yes, it asks if I am ready. And you reply? By the same sign, which at the same time tells my right-hand correspondent that I am ready, while it gives notice to my left-hand's correspondent to prepare in his turn. It is very ingenious, said the Count. You will see, said the man proudly. In 5 minutes he will speak. I have, then, 5 minutes, said Monte Cristo to himself. It is more time than I require. My dear sir, will you allow me to ask you a question? What is it, sir? You are fond of gardening? Passionately. And you would be pleased to have, instead of this terrace of 20 feet, an enclosure of 2 acres? Oh, sir, I should make a terrestrial palace of it. You live badly on your 1,000 francs? Badly enough, but yet I do live. Yes, but you have a wretchedly small garden. True, the garden is not large. And then, such as it is filled with dormice, who eat everything. Ah, they are my scourges. Tell me, should you have the misfortune to turn your head while your right-hand correspondent was telegraphing, I should not see him. Then what would happen? I could not repeat the signals. And then, not having repeated them through negligence, I should be fired. How much? I should be fined. How much? 100 francs. The 10th of your income. That would be fine work. Ah, said the man. Has it ever happened to you? Said Monte Cristo. Once, sir, when I was grafting a rose tree. Well, Suppose you were to alter a signal and substitute another. Ah, that is another case. I should be turned off and lose my pension. 300 francs? 100 crowns, yes, sir. So you see that I am not likely to do any of these things. Not even for 15 years' wages? Come, it is worth thinking about? For 15,000 francs? Yes. Sir, you alarm me. Nonsense. Sir, you are tempting me? Just so. 15,000 francs. Do you understand? Sir, let me see my right-hand correspondent. On the contrary, do not look at him, but at this. What is it? What? Do you not know these bits of paper? Banknotes. Exactly. There are 15 of them. And whose are they? Yours, if you like. Mine? Exclaimed the man, half suffocated. Yes, yours, your own property. Sir, my right-hand correspondent is signaling. Let him signal. Sir, you have distracted me. I shall be fined. That will cost you 100 francs. You see, it is your interest to take my banknotes. Sir, my right-hand correspondent redoubles his signals. He is impatient. Never mind. Take these, and the Count placed the packet in the man's hands. Now, that is not all. You cannot live upon your 15,000 francs. I shall still have my place. No, you will lose it, for you are going to alter your correspondent's message. Oh, sir, what are you proposing? A jest. Sir, unless you force me... I think I can effectually force you, said Monte Cristo, and drew another packet from his pocket. Here are 10,000 more francs, he said. With the 15,000 already in your pocket, they will make 25,000. With 5,000, you can buy a pretty little house with 2 acres of land. The remaining 20 will bring you in 1,000 francs a year. A garden with 2 acres of land! And 1,000 francs a year. Oh, heavens! Come, take them. And Monte Cristo forced the banknotes into his hand. What am I to do? Nothing very difficult. But what is it? To repeat these signs. Monte Cristo took a paper from his pocket upon which were drawn 3 signs with numbers to indicate the order in which they were to be worked. There, you see it will not take long. Yes, but... Do this, and you will have nectarines and all the rest. The shot told. Red with fever, while the large drops fell from his brow, the man executed, one after the other, the 3 signs given by the Count, in spite of the frightful contortions of the right-hand correspondent, who, not understanding the change, began to think the gardener had gone mad. As to the left-hand one, he conscientiously repeated the same signals which were finally transmitted to the Minister of the Interior. Now you are rich, said Monte Cristo. Yes, replied the man, but at what a price? Listen, friend, said Monte Cristo, I do not wish to cause you any remorse. Believe me, then, when I swear to you that you have wronged no man, but on the contrary have benefited mankind. The man looked at the banknotes, felt them, counted them, turned pale, then red, then rushed into his room to drink a glass of water, but he had no time to reach the water jug and fainted in the midst of his dried herbs. 5 minutes after the new telegram reached the minister, Debray had the horses put to his carriage and drove to Danglars' house. Has your husband any Spanish bonds? He asked of the Baroness. I think so, indeed. He has 6 millions worth. He must sell them at whatever price. Why? Because Don Carlos has fled from Bourges and has returned to Spain. How do you know? Debray shrugged his shoulders. The idea of asking how I hear the news, he said. The Baroness did not wait for a repetition. She ran to her husband, who immediately hastened to his agent and ordered him to sell at any price. When it was seen that Danglars sold, the Spanish funds fell directly. Danglars lost 500,000 francs, but he rid himself of all his Spanish shares. The same evening, the following was read in Le Messager. By telegraph. The king, Don Carlos, has escaped the vigilance of his guardians at Bourges and is returned to Spain by the Catalonian frontier. Barcelona has risen in his favor. All that evening, nothing was spoken of but the foresight of Danglars, who had sold his shares, and of the luck of the stock jobber, who only lost 500,000 francs by such a blow. Those who had kept their shares, or bought those of Danglars, looked upon themselves as ruined and passed a very bad night. Next morning, Le Moniteur contained the following. It is without any foundation that Le Messager yesterday announced the flight of Don Carlos and the revolt of Barcelona. The king, Don Carlos, has not left Bourges, and the peninsula is in the enjoyment of profound peace. A telegraphic signal, improperly interpreted owing to the fog, was the cause of this error. The funds rose 1% higher than before they had fallen. This, reckoning his loss and what he had missed gaining, made the difference of 1,000,000 to Danglars. Good, said Monte Cristo to Morrel, who was at his house when the news arrived of the strange reversal of fortune of which Danglars had been the victim. I have just made a discovery for 25,000 francs, for which I would have paid 100,000. What have you discovered? Asked Morrel. I have just discovered how a gardener may get rid of the dormice that eat his peaches. Okay, now chapter 62, which is called Ghosts in Our Routledge and Sons and Shadows in the Everyman Library. Okay, chapter 62, Ghosts. At first sight, the exterior of the house at Auteuil gave no indications of splendor. Nothing one would expect from the destined residence of the magnificent Count of Monte Cristo. But this simplicity was according to the will of its master, who positively ordered nothing to be altered outside. The splendor was within. Indeed, almost before the door opened, the scene changed. Monsieur Bertuccio had outdone himself in the taste displayed in furnishing, and in the rapidity with which it was executed. It is told that the Duc d'Antin removed in a single night a whole avenue of trees that annoyed Louis XIV. In 3 days, Monsieur Bertuccio planted an entirely bare court with poplars, large spreading sycamores to shade the different parts of the house, and in the foreground, instead of the usual paving stones, half hidden by the grass, there extended a lawn but that morning laid down, and upon which the water was yet glistening. For the rest, the orders had been issued by the Count. He himself had given a plan to Bertuccio, marking the spot where each tree was to be planted, and the shape and extent of the lawn which was to take the place of the paving stones. Thus the house had become unrecognizable, and Bertuccio himself declared that he scarcely knew it, encircled as it was by a framework of trees. The overseer would not have objected, when he was about it, to have made some improvements in the garden, but the Count had positively forbidden it to be touched. Bertuccio made amends, however, by loading the antechambers, staircases, and mantelpieces with flowers. What, above all, manifested the shrewdness of the steward and the profound science of the master, the one in carrying out the ideas of the other, was that this house, which appeared only the night before so sad and gloomy, impregnated with that sickly smell one can almost fancy to be the smell of time, had in a single day acquired the aspect of life, was scented with its master's favorite perfumes, and had the very light regulated according to his wish. When the Count arrived, he had under his touch his books and arms. His eyes rested upon his favorite pictures. His dogs, whose caresses he loved, welcomed him in the antechamber. The birds, whose songs delighted him, cheered him with their music, and the house, awakened from its long sleep, like the sleeping beauty in the wood, lived, sang, and bloomed like the houses we have long cherished, and in which, when we are forced to leave them, we leave a part of our souls. The servants passed gaily along the fine courtyard, some belonging to the kitchens, gliding down the stairs, restored but the previous day as if they had always inhabited the house. Others, filling the coach-houses, where the equipages, encased and numbered, appeared to have been installed for the last 50 years. And in the stables the horses replied with neighs to the grooms, who spoke to them with much more respect than many servants pay their masters. The library was divided into 2 parts on either side of the wall, and contained upwards of 2,000 volumes. One division was entirely devoted to novels, and even the volume which had been published but the day before was to be seen in its place in all the dignity of its red and gold binding. On the other side of the house, to match with the library, was the conservatory, ornamented with rare flowers that bloomed in china jars, and in the midst of the greenhouse, marvelous alike to sight and smell, was a billiard table which looked as if it had been abandoned during the past hour by players who had left the balls on the cloth. One chamber alone had been respected by the magnificent Bertuccio. Before this room, to which you could ascend by the grand and go out by the back staircase, the servants passed with curiosity, and Bertuccio with terror. At 5 o'clock precisely, the Count arrived before the house at Auteuil, followed by Ali. Bertuccio was awaiting this arrival with impatience, mingled with uneasiness. He hoped for some compliments, while at the same time he feared to have frowns. Monte Cristo descended into the courtyard, walked all over the house, without giving any sign of approbation or pleasure, until he entered his bedroom, situated on the opposite side to the closed room. Then he approached a little piece of furniture made of rosewood, which he had noticed at a previous visit. "That can only be to hold gloves," he said. "Will your Excellency deign to open it?" said the delighted Bertuccio, "and you will find gloves in it." Elsewhere the Count found everything he required: smelling bottles, cigars, knickknacks. "Good," he said, and Monsieur Bertuccio left enraptured. So great, so powerful, and real was the influence exercised by this man over all who surrounded him. At precisely 6 o'clock the clatter of horses' hooves was heard at the entrance door. It was our captain of Spahis, who had arrived on Medea. "I am sure I am the first," cried Morel. "I did it on purpose to have you a minute to myself before everyone came. Julie and Emmanuel have 1,000 things to tell you. Ah, really, this is magnificent! But tell me, Count, will your people take care of my horse?" "Do not alarm yourself, my dear Maximilian. They understand." "I mean, because he wants petting. If you had seen at what a pace he came, like the wind." "I should think so. A horse that cost 5,000 francs, said Monte Cristo, in a tone which a father would use towards a son. "Do you regret them?" asked Morel, with his open laugh. "I? Certainly not," replied the Count. "No, I should only regret if the horse had not proved good. It is so good that I have distanced Monsieur de Château-Renaud, one of the best riders in France, and Monsieur Debray, who both mount the minister's Arabians, and close on their heels are the horses of Madame Danglars, who always go at 6 leagues an hour." "And then they follow you?" asked Monte Cristo. "See, they are here." And at the same minute a carriage with smoking horses, accompanied by 2 mounted gentlemen, arrived at the gate, which opened before them. The carriage drove round and stopped at the steps, followed by the horsemen. The instant Debray had touched the ground, he was at the carriage door. He offered his hand to the Baroness, who, descending, took it, with a peculiarity of manner imperceptible to everyone but Monte Cristo. But nothing escaped the Count's notice, and he observed a little note, passed with the facility that indicates frequent practice, from the hand of Madame Danglars to that of the minister's secretary. After his wife, the banker descended, as pale as though he had issued from his tomb instead of his carriage. Madame Danglars threw a rapid and inquiring glance, which could only be interpreted by Monte Cristo, around the courtyard, over the peristyle, and across the front of the house. Then, repressing a slight emotion which must have been seen on her countenance if she had not kept her color, she ascended the steps, saying to Morel, "Sir, if you were a friend of mine, I should ask you if you would sell your horse." Morel smiled with an expression very like a grimace, and then turned round to Monte Cristo, as if to ask him to extricate him from his embarrassment. The Count understood him. "Ah, madame," he said, "why did you not make that request of me?" "With you, sir," replied the Baroness, "one can wish for nothing. One is so sure to obtain it. If it were so with Monsieur Morel—" "Unfortunately," replied the Count, "I am witness that Monsieur Morel cannot give up his horse, his honor being engaged in keeping it." "How so?" "He laid a wager he would tame Medea in the space of 6 months. You understand now that if he were to get rid of the animal before the time named, he would not only lose his bet, but people would say he was afraid, and a brave captain of Spahis cannot risk this, even to gratify a pretty woman, which is, in my opinion, one of the most sacred obligations in the world. You see my position, madame, said Morel, bestowing a graceful smile on Monte Cristo. It seems to me, said Danglars, in his coarse tone, ill-concealed by a forced smile, that you have already got horses enough. Madame Danglars seldom allowed remarks of this kind to pass unnoticed, but to the surprise of the young people, she pretended not to hear it and said nothing. Monte Cristo smiled at her unusual humility and showed her 2 immense porcelain jars over which wound marine plants of a size and delicacy that nature alone could produce. The Baroness was astonished. "Why," said she, "you could plant one of the chestnut trees in the Tuileries inside. How can such enormous jars have been manufactured?" "Ah, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "you must not ask of us, the manufacturers of fine porcelain, such a question. It is the work of another age, constructed by the genii of earth and water." "How so? At what period could that have been?" "I do not know. I have only heard that an emperor of China had an oven built expressly, and that in this oven 12 jars just like this were successively baked. 2 broke from the heat of the fire, the other 10 were sunk 300 fathoms deep into the sea. The sea, knowing what was required of her, threw over them her weeds, encircled them with coral, and encrusted them with shells. The whole was cemented by 200 years beneath these almost impervious depths, for a revolution carried away the emperor who wished to make the trial, and only left the documents proving the manufacture of the jars and their descent into the sea. At the end of 200 years the documents were found, and they thought of bringing up the jars. Divers descended in machines, made expressly on the discovery, into the bay where they were thrown. But of 10, 3 only remained, the rest having been broken by the waves. I am fond of these jars, upon which, perhaps, misshapen, frightful monsters have fixed their cold, dull eyes, and in which myriads of small fish have slept, seeking a refuge from the pursuit of their enemies." Meanwhile, Danglars, who had cared little for curiosities, was mechanically tearing off the blossoms of a splendid orange tree, one after another. When he had finished with the orange tree, he began at the cactus, but this, not being so easily plucked as the orange tree, pricked him dreadfully. He shuddered and rubbed his eyes as though awaking from a dream. "Sir," said Monte Cristo to him, "I do not recommend my pictures to you, who possess such splendid paintings, but nevertheless, here are 2 by Hobbema, a Paul Potter, a Mieri, 2 by Gerard Doux, a Raphael, a Van Dyck, a Zurbaran, and 2 or 3 by Murillo, worth looking at." "Stay," said Debray, "I recognize this Hobbema." "Ah, indeed." "Yes, it was proposed for the museum." "Which I believe does not contain one," said Monte Cristo. "No, and yet they refused to buy it." "Why?" said Chateau Renaud. "You pretend not to know?" "Because government was not rich enough." "Ah, pardon me," said Chateau Renaud. "I have heard of these things every day during the last 8 years, and I cannot understand them." "You will, by and by," said Debray. "I think not," replied Chateau Renaud. "Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti and Count Andrea Cavalcanti," announced Baptistine. A black satin stock, fresh from the maker's hands, gray mustaches, a bold eye, a major's uniform ornamented with 3 medals and 5 crosses. In fact, the thorough bearing of an old soldier. Such was the appearance of Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, that tender father with whom we are already acquainted. Close to him, dressed in entirely new clothes, advanced smilingly Count Andrea Cavalcanti, the dutiful son, whom we also know. The 3 young people were talking together. On the entrance of the newcomers, their eyes glanced from father to son, and then naturally enough rested on the latter, whom they began criticizing. "Cavalcanti," said Debray. "A fine name," said Morel. "Yes," said Chateau Renaud, "and these Italians are well named and badly dressed." "You are fastidious, Chateau Renaud," replied Debray. "Those clothes are well cut and quite new." "That is just what I find fault with. That gentleman appears to be well dressed for the first time in his life." "Who are those gentlemen?" asked Danglars of Monte Cristo. "You heard, Cavalcanti." "That tells me their name and nothing else." "Ah, true. You do not know the Italian nobility. The Cavalcanti are all descended from princes." "Have they any fortune?" "An enormous one." "What do they do?" "Try to spend it all. They have some business with you, I think, from what they told me the day before yesterday. I, indeed, invited them here today on your account. I will introduce you to them." "But they appear to speak French with a very pure accent," said Danglars. "The son has been educated in a college in the south, I believe near Marseille. You will find him quite enthusiastic." "Upon what subject?" asked Madame Danglars. "The French ladies, madame. He has made up his mind to take a wife from Paris." "A fine idea, that of his," said Danglars, shrugging his shoulders. Madame Danglars looked at her husband with an expression which, at any other time, would have indicated a storm, but for the second time she controlled herself. "The Baron appears thoughtful today," said Monte Cristo to her. "Are they going to put him in the ministry?" "Not yet, I think. More likely he has been speculating on the Bourse and has lost money." "Monsieur and Madame de Villefort," cried Baptistine. They entered. Monsieur de Villefort, notwithstanding his self-control, was visibly affected, and when Monte Cristo touched his hand, he felt it tremble. "Certainly, women alone know how to dissimulate," said Monte Cristo to himself, glancing at Madame Danglars, who was smiling on the procureur and embracing his wife. After a short time, the Count saw Bertuccio, who, until then, had been occupied on the other side of the house, glide into an adjoining room. He went to him. "What do you want, Monsieur Bertuccio?" said he. "Your Excellency has not stated the number of guests." "Ah, true. How many covers?" "Count for yourself." "Is everyone here, Your Excellency?" "Yes." Bertuccio glanced through the door, which was ajar. The Count watched him. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "What is the matter?" said the Count. "That woman! That woman!" "Which?" "The one with the white dress and so many diamonds. The fair one." "Madame Danglars?" "I do not know her name, but it is she, sir. It is she." "Whom do you mean?" "The woman of the garden, she that was enceinte, she who was walking while she waited for—" Bertuccio stood at the open door with his eyes starting and his hair on end. "Waiting for whom?" Bertuccio, without answering, pointed to Villefort with something of the gesture Macbeth uses to point out Banquo. "Oh, oh," he at length muttered, "do you see?" "What? Who?" "Him!" "Him? Monsieur de Villefort, the king's attorney? Certainly I see him." "Then I did not kill him?" "Really, I think you are going mad, good Bertuccio," said the Count. "Then he is not dead?" "No, you see plainly he is not dead. Instead of striking between the 6th and 7th ribs, as your countrymen do, you must have struck higher or lower, and life is very tenacious in these lawyers, or rather, there is no truth in anything you have told me. It was a fright of the imagination, a dream of your fancy. You went to sleep full of thoughts of vengeance. They weighed heavily upon your stomach. You had the nightmare. That's all. Come, calm yourself and reckon them up. Monsieur and Madame de Villefort, 2. Monsieur and Madame Danglars, 4. Monsieur de Chateau Renaud, Monsieur Debray, Monsieur Morel, 7. Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, 8. 8, repeated Bertuccio. Stop! You are in a shocking hurry to be off. You forget one of my guests. Lean a little to the left. Stay. Look at Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, the young man in a black coat, looking at Murillo's Madonna. Now, he is turning. This time, Bertuccio would have uttered an exclamation had not a look from Monte Cristo silenced him. Benedetto? He murmured, or muttered. Fatality. 6:30 has just struck, Monsieur Bertuccio, said the Count severely. I ordered dinner at that hour, and I do not like to wait. And he returned to his guests, while Bertuccio, leaning against the wall, succeeded in reaching the dining room. 5 minutes afterwards, the doors of the drawing room were thrown open, and Bertuccio, appearing, said, with a violent effort, "The dinner awaits." The Count of Monte Cristo offered his arm to Madame de Villefort. "Monsieur de Villefort," he said, "will you conduct the Baroness Danglars?" Villefort complied, and they passed on to the dining room. And that concludes chapter 62. Okay. I think you got all that, but just in case not, let me just make sure we all understand what happened there. In that last chapter, Bertuccio found out that he did not murder Monsieur de Villefort as he had thought he had done so many years ago. He discovered the identity of the woman who had been the secret lover of Monsieur de Villefort in the house owned by his in-laws, which is even a little more heinous than having a mistress. And that woman was Baroness Danglars. And also, he sees that Benedetto, the foundling whom he took in after digging it out of the garden that Villefort had buried, that child Benedetto has come back and is being introduced as Andrea Cavalcanti. Finally, the last bit is the Count of Monte Cristo maneuvering so that he escorts into dinner Madame de Villefort, leaving Monsieur de Villefort to escort in the Baroness Danglars, his former lover, and the mother of the child that he tried to bury that he doesn't realize is at dinner with them. Dun, dun, dun! Oh my goodness, a lot of drama happening in this one. So, I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and we'll find out more next week about what happens in The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Thank you. Have a great, great weekend. Bye.